Anna Holmes, and I'm a writer and editor living in New York, where I work as an editor at Fusion Digital and as a columnist for the New York Times Sunday Book Review. I'm very thrilled to be here to moderate the post-screening panel about net neutrality and the film The Internet Must Go. The next half hour is going to shape up this way. I'm going to introduce the panelists. I'm going to ask them some questions, and then some of you watching will be able to ask questions as well. And there are two ways you can do this. One, if you're watching the panel from within the Demand Progress platform, the best way to ask questions is by tweeting using the hashtag #InternetMustGo. Two, if you have the Reddit Ask Me Anything thread open, you can ask questions by writing them as comments there, and we will try to answer some of the most popular ones live during the panel. After the panel is over, everyone will automatically be forwarded to the Reddit conversation where some of our panelists and others will continue to answer questions in written form. So I wanted to share a brief personal anecdote about net neutrality. I really only became aware of the issue a few years ago when I was lucky enough to catch a screening of Gina's film, the one we just watched, while in Denver at a conference held by the Free Press. To say that I'd been naive beforehand would be a kind of understatement, even though I considered myself very web savvy, and I'd worked successfully on the internet for a number of years at that point. I didn't think the threats to open access and therefore unfettered and open communication online had really sunk in until I saw the film. I'd heard of the phrase net neutrality, yes, and I'd even, as the creator and one-time editor of Jezebel.com, been subject to what I felt were kind of minor attempts to censor the content of the site I created, mostly hotel chains, which didn't like the fact that we talked about sex or reproductive rights. But some part of me just couldn't believe that there might be a possibility that everything I had known and loved as a content creator and as a consumer of others' content might change drastically thanks to the greed of a few powerful, obscenely wealthy telecom companies. The internet was owned by all of us, right? No. In fact, it's entirely possible that without net neutrality, we wouldn't even be able to have the screening or the live video chat at all, or at least not as successfully. After all, why on earth would a for-profit company like Comcast or AT&T allow for the unrestricted agitations of open internet activists, especially if they weren't paying extra for the privilege? So now we're going to focus on the panelists who we have here. We have Kevin Avery, who's a comedian and writer for the HBO show Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, which is airing later tonight on HBO. We have musician Nate Query of the Decemberists. We have Gina, whose last name I'm going to mess up, Konstantinakos, who's the director of The Internet Must Go, the film we all just enjoyed. And we have Alexis Ohanian, who's the author of the book Without Their Permission, How the 21st Century Will Be Made, Not Managed, and he's also a co-founder of Reddit. So the first question goes to Gina. Gina, can you tell us a little bit about the genesis of the film and why you decided to make a film like this, why you decided to take that particular approach using kind of mockumentary style?
Yeah, sure. So I started thinking about this issue back in late 2010, 2011, and there were basically two things that happened. One was the Citizens United Court decision, and the other was the approval of the NBC-Comcast merger. And it seemed like, in many ways, just like a really grim moment as far as fewer and fewer companies taking over more of our democracy and our media. And in contrast with that was the internet, which is this open, thriving place, and that seemed like a reason to be pretty hopeful, except for the fact that there was nothing protecting it. And when I realized that there was nothing guaranteeing that the internet would stay that way, it seemed pretty worrying and disturbing, and I remember feeling like, why doesn't everyone else I know feel worried and disturbed about this? And then I started reading more about it, and the more I read about it, the more I realized that, it's incredibly boring to read about this issue. And so, the stakes feel really abstract. There's no real narrative arc. It doesn't feel like an emotional issue. It feels really technical and dry. And so I wanted to try to make a film that would sort of put the things intrinsically lacking from the subject matter into it, just give it a storyline and hopefully make it funny and give it a little bit of heart and put people in it who could help really explain the issue. And so, yeah, and so that's basically, I would say that's the summary of how it started.
Did you feel like you were kind of out there on your own when you first became interested in the issue of net neutrality? I mean, you mentioned that no one was talking about it and it was very dry. Were you like one of the only people in your peer group who knew anything about it back then? Or were you in it pretty educated?
Well, yeah, I would say I remember having conversations with friends of mine where I would start to talk about it, and you kind of get to like the third syllable of net neutrality, and people's eyes are glazing over, and like you're like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I always wonder whether there's a better term than net neutrality for it. But that leads me to my next question, which is actually for Kevin. Kevin, you wrote a really great and really damning spot for John Oliver's Sunday night show last week with John Oliver. It aired, I believe, in early June. And
Uh,
when I was looking at it, sorry, was that right?
yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. When I was looking at it again earlier today, I noticed it has over 5 million views, which is
Oh, wow.
pretty remarkable and amazing. This is on YouTube. And I also heard that it inspired so many comments to the FCC that it crashed their site, which is a sign of success. I just want to know what inspired you to write that segment, for lack of a better word, and also if you were surprised by the attention that it got.
Um, it wasn't a subject that I actually picked.
We may have
Come up
lost
with.
Kevin.
It
Oh.
might have even been a subject that that John wanted to talk about himself. I was just somebody that hopped onto the piece, and I worked with other writers on it. I worked with another writer, and then we saw all sort of pitch other jokes. But I think we were all kind of surprised at how at the effect it had, like on the FCC website, and that we're trying to make jokes and let people know, hey, this is the thing happening. We're not an
Mhm.
activist show by any means, but so we thought, wouldn't it be funny to tell people to go, you know, just invade the website and
Yeah.
raise all kinds of hell. We had no idea that it would do what it did. It was very exciting for us, and funny. I mean, that's just, we're all like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so it was kind of cool that happened, and yeah, it was very exciting too.
You could tell that he was really passionate about the issue. I mean, I realize that when he's on camera, he's performing to a certain degree, but it felt very, very legitimate and realistic. Even when he got up from around the desk and implored internet trolls to invade the FCC site. I'm wondering, when you were working on the segment, did you learn things that you hadn't known before, or were you already pretty well versed in the issue of net neutrality, and like what was surprising, what was not surprising?
Oh yeah, I mean, I had learned everything. I didn't know I knew nothing about it. I mean, I knew what it was and I knew the basic idea about it, but I didn't know, um, just how bad it was. Just what the the sort of uphill battle
Hmm.
that it really was, and I didn't understand who was doing what, and it was, you do a lot of research for this, and a lot. I've never been a political comedian, and so a lot of this stuff is like, oh, really? That's a thing that's happening. So I had to dig deep and do a lot of research to sort of figure out what this meant and what was going on. And yeah, it's like Gina said, it's kind of a it could be a dull topic. It's really not a dull topic. It just sounds like it's boring. And
Right.
I mean, that's one of the things we said in the piece. Um, People have discovered if you want to do something evil, hide it in something boring, and people will just
Right.
be like, whatever, okay, just do what you're gonna do. I'm watching Mad Men, so
Yeah.
that was one of the things that we really wanted to kind of bring out in the piece.
Can you talk a little bit about the experience that you've had as a creator and as a creative person with regards to the open internet and how it's helped facilitate your work? I know that in addition to writing for TV, you do stand-up comedy. Can you talk a little bit about how the internet so far, the open internet, has helped you as an artist and as a creator?
Yeah, I mean, as a filmmaker and as a comedian, we're the internet is a place. It's, I mean, like everyone talks about Mark Maron's podcast WTF and
Hmm.
all these things that are found on the internet that are reaching audiences that they couldn't have reached before. I mean, if you want to do a thing, you can just put it out there, and your audience is going to find you, and that's huge for artists. And so, like I made a film, and we were able to put it on the internet and sell it for $1. just like, what the hell? And but it's out there, and that's, you know, artists live and die on that type of thing, on our audiences being able to find us. And so that's, especially today, you know, people have so many options. It's important to be able to have your stuff out there and not have it, you know, be impeded, have it be too hard to find, you know?
Nate, I want to pivot over to you. You're also a creative and an artist, a musician, among other things, and I want to know how you first became aware of net neutrality as an issue, and you know, what you've kind of done since you became aware of it as a kind of threat, or not net neutrality, but that the FCC was threatening to change the way that we consume content online.
Well, it's funny, when I first heard about it and started learning about it, it almost seemed like obviously piracy has had a hugely negative effect on the music business, but then I started learning about it, and at the same time, it's like our ability as musicians to connect to our fans has changed so much. Like 20 years ago, when I first started in the music business, there was a chokehold on connecting to fans, which is the major labels kind of controlled how you could connect to people. And over the last 20 years, it's changed so that we can connect directly to our fans. Along with that has come the ability for people to sort of like put it out there in the piracy way, but it's not like this is going to change that. And this is the net neutrality basically makes it so that we can connect through all these different platforms, whether it's like Bandcamp or MySpace, which is outdated now but has been very important, or SoundCloud, or there's just a million startups. Like every year you have to keep up and change the way you put your music out there. But if you have a new band or an established one, you have to find the ways to connect to people. And the idea that Verizon would have more control over it than me is totally frightening. And so that's kind of the conclusion I've ended up coming to after learning more about it. But even that, it's like, it's hard to explain in a way that is sort of compelling rather than, you know, sounds like it's a hard thing to talk about.
Are the people in your peer group? I know you're in Oregon. Are the people in your peer group both in your physical location and also just in the same business that you're in? Do they seem to be kind of charged up about this, or is it not something that's penetrated most people's consciousness net? Yeah.
I think it's starting to really hit home, and actually the John Oliver piece really helped, I think, and because it is one of those things where people are sort of like, oh, really? Is it that big of a deal? I don't know. Because as a musician, like, most people would rather not know as much as they know about the technical side of reaching people through the internet. But you have to know. You have to, like, stay up on, is it MySpace now, or now it's Bandcamp, or is it Facebook, or is it SoundCloud, or is it, do we have to do something with Spotify now, or do they just take it, you know? No one really knows, and as a musician, you just want to make it and get it out there. But now you sort of have to have a second calling and know how to do that. And so I'm like 40, so I'm kind of old for a musician as far as this goes now. But certainly the younger generation here in Portland is like way more on fire about this than people my age, and it's starting to really get some steam as far as like people getting excited about trying to preserve what we have, because there's absolutely nothing wrong with it right now.
Yeah. We also have Craig Aaron. Hi, Craig. Craig is the CEO and the president of the Free Press. I'm glad you're here. I want to ask you some questions, if you can maybe situate us in what's going on with regards to net neutrality and the FCC right now, August 10th, and what's to come in the next couple of weeks.
Sure, happy to do it. Trust you can hear me. And thanks for including me. So what's happening now at the FCC is they announced these new rules, these deeply flawed rules, and put them out for public comment in May. That's when we saw this huge burst of interest and activism. The first round of public input and comments closed on July 15th. More than 1 million people have contacted the FCC, made comments, and running about 99-1 against what the FCC is doing. And now what happens is we're in what's called reply comments. So this is a chance to tell the FCC what you think about what other people said, like AT&T and Comcast or Free Press. And that period will kind of run through early September. September 10th is the deadline. But really what we're looking at, that's sort of like the FCC calendar, but really what we're looking at is the FCC moving to make rules could be by the end of this year, could slip into early next year. It'll almost certainly be after the midterm elections, which means right now, this summer is the time to really get organized. It's been an unbelievable amount of public response for an issue like this already, but we're going to need to double or triple that if we're going to put enough pressure on the FCC to change what they're doing and go down a different path. So we've really got about 6 months to save the internet, I think, and we're in the fight, which is the good news, but we haven't won anything yet.
Do you have any predictions for what's going to happen? Like, is the FCC listening to people?
I think they are listening because they've never gotten this kind of public response really to anything. So the idea that, sure, once during a Super Bowl, Janet Jackson was exposed and a lot of people wrote in. So we know about that one time during the Super Bowl when 50 million people were watching. The fact that, more than 1 million people have done comments, probably 5 million people have signed petitions, called Congress, made a lot of noise about this. Somebody like the Federal Communications Commission, they're just not used to it. They're not used to being on John Oliver's show. They're not used to being asked in press conferences about whether they're a dingo. That doesn't happen there. So I think the environment is very different for the way that most things usually happen at the FCC, and that gives me a lot of optimism and confidence. The test is, can the public stay engaged? Can they keep making noise? We've seen it on so many issues. Right now they're wondering, oh, maybe it'll all just go away. Maybe it'll be a thing that we just heard about once. That's really the test. These are folks, they're politicians. They follow. They don't necessarily lead. And the more they hear from the public, the more they hear people's personal stories, and frankly, the more they get outside the Beltway and hear from people outside the Beltway, I think the more likely they are to actually do the right thing here and protect internet users everywhere.
Are there any specific politicians that we should be aware of who should be pressured on this, who might be up for re-election during the midterms?
Well, being the nonpartisan nonprofit that I am, I won't comment on anybody's electoral status, but the main target here is Tom Wheeler. He's the chairman of the FCC. He's himself a former industry lobbyist, now head of the FCC. He's the one who really does need to move and change his mind and change the rules, but he does need 2 votes from his colleagues at the FCC. So at least if he needs them to vote for what he's doing, and the Republicans on the FCC have been very clear, they're not going to do that. So he still needs 2 more votes, and really, though, the political pressure here, it could come from Congress. They oversee the FCC. They do their budget, so that really matters, what your member of Congress says about this. And from the White House, President Barack Obama appointed Tom Wheeler. He appointed everybody who's on the commission right now. The signals that he sends, which are getting better, are going to have a lot. You're going to have a lot to say about whether they eventually change course and do the right thing. So it really is a political fight. The facts are pretty clear. It's really the politics, because they still perceive that they have more to fear at the FCC from AT&T and Comcast than they do from the American people.
It was funny, before the movie started screening, I was on Twitter and I noticed someone complaining about Comcast, but for a different reason. and I thought, if only we could all take to Twitter and complain about Comcast and these other telecoms with regards to net neutrality. That's going to lead me to a question from the other audience. I have one for Kevin. How does the kind of level playing field of the open internet facilitate your work as a comedian and a creative? I know you kind of touched on that a little bit before, but is there any other detail you can go into, whether it's research for segments on the John Oliver Show or personal projects that you're working on?
Yeah, I think it's as a comedian, it's sort of becoming a thing that we're using the internet more and more to put our material out there. So, it used to be every now and then you'd slap like a video on YouTube, something you shot in a club of you doing stand-up. But now it's, where do you put your comedy album? Where do you put your short film that you made? So comedians are having to do just that business of comedy. It's more than just going out in clubs and performing. It's about what can you put out there, what project are you working on, what film or whatever you're making. It's about what you can put out there. So the internet is everything for us at this point, and it's our bread and butter, so to speak.
Another audience question. I think I'm gonna direct this back to Craig. Uh, the audience member wants to know: could a good VPN get the people with the net neutrality issue past it by disguising their IP and ISP address?
I think it's a fair question, and I mean, there's no question that people who really have the ability to hack around problems, have a lot of technical know-how, might be able to find ways to do very specific things that could benefit them as individuals and maybe get around obstacles that people set up. But the problem we really face here is more of a public policy question, and that's how is it going to work for everybody? And most of us, people don't know what a VPN is, how to use it.
I just learned myself like a month ago.
How to get their mother, their grandmother to use it. The beauty of the internet, what we're really trying to protect here is everybody be able to go online, go wherever you want, do whatever you want, download whatever you want, and you shouldn't have to ask for permission. And frankly, you shouldn't have to come up with a million ways to hack around what your ISPs are doing either. And maybe that day will come and we'll all have to start building some alternate internet, but we haven't lost this one yet. So I think that's why this political fight is so important.
Gina, I have a question I'm going to direct at you from one of the audience members. How effective would it be to have the internet classified as a public utility? Would that be feasible? And what would that accomplish as far as keeping the internet free?
Well, I think when it comes to the feasibility, Craig will be better equipped to answer that. I think in terms of the change that it would make, I think Larry Lessig in the film, who at the moment is having technical issues but is trying to join the conversation, he made a great point about the internet should work the way an electricity grid works, which is you plug something in, it doesn't ask you the brand of the device that you're plugging in. And at this point, it does feel like we all rely on the internet almost as much as we rely on electricity. And so yeah, I think personally that it is a public good, and for it to be as accessible to one person as it is to another, without ISPs picking winners and losers is a really important thing, especially given that they don't actually have any real competition, and they do have pretty much like near monopoly status when it comes to decision making. So yeah, so I think it would be great if it were treated like electricity. And Craig, you will be able to answer better than I can as to whether or not that's feasible. Title II definitely seems like at least close, but you can explain that better.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all about the outcomes that we want, and we want the internet to work like a utility in the sense that you flip on the light switch and the light switch comes on. You turn on your tap and water comes out. And that's how we want the internet to work. Maybe it's not as essential as electricity or water, but it's right up there with hot water at this point, right? That's what we need. So under the law, what you're talking about is not, sort of a regulated utility in the same way that like the electric company would be, but you're talking about treating the internet as what's called a common carrier. And it basically just means that the companies don't get to mess with what's going over the pipes. They got to treat everybody the same. And there's a long history in telecommunications, not just telecommunications, radios, taxi cabs, roller coasters, that are common carriers. But in telecom, this is a widely accepted thing. It's the way the phone network always was. It's where the internet always was up until the FCC started messing with it in 2002. And we just need to restore that under the law. It's called Title II of the Communications Act, classifying broadband as a common carrier and making it so that the people who bring those pipes to your house don't really have anything to say about what goes over the pipes. Their job is to just make big open pipes that will benefit all of us. That's what's going to give us the most opportunity, encourage the most innovation, and we need the FCC not to heavily regulate here, but to have the threat that they could regulate and to make sure that they've got the power to really stop companies that are discriminating, interfering, messing with your internet connection. So in that sense of reliability, absolutely, it should work like a utility, and we certainly have the power to do so. The Federal Communications Commission has the power to do so. They just need to use it.
I'm going to direct one of these audience questions to Nate. The audience member says, I read something disheartening that the FCC won't weigh most of the public comments because they weren't, quote, substantive, end quote, enough. My question for you, Nate, is what would you say to the FCC in a substantive way to tell them to take this seriously?
Well, it's hard to imagine what they mean by substantive. It seems like anybody's opinion would be just as substantive as Verizon's opinion, but you know that like every day I use both upload and download bandwidth both for personal use, trying to just get my work done, like whether it's like hearing the latest Decemberist mix, which is happening right now, and our producer has the slowest upload ever, or whether it's like, you know, putting a new song or video out there for fans. And so I don't know why a little guy isn't as substantive. I mean, I assume that's what they mean. That seems really like a really strange comment or reaction to getting millions of comments, a negative against the possible decision they're making.
Yeah. So the last question, and then we're going to turn this over to the Reddit AMA. I'm going to direct it back to Craig, since you know all the little ins and outs of the kind of policy and the politics here. One of the audience questions is as follows. If the ISP were limited to a percentage of profit instead of being able to make almost 100%, what would be the outcome?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, you know, I don't have any problem with these companies being profitable, but I think the questioner is right to note that you've got companies that are making 80, 90% profit margins off your cable modem. So it's not so much that I want to limit their profits, but it's all about creating the appropriate incentives so they'll actually invest in their networks. And the problem with what the FCC is doing right now is they're encouraging the big ISPs to profit from artificial scarcity. In other words, they can't, the only reason to make an express lane or a fast lane for a few companies is if everybody else is stuck in a traffic jam. So by creating the rules in this way, it actually encourages the companies to slow down everybody else, and then the big guys will want to pay for this specialized service. So I'm happy for them to be as profitable as they can be until they start messing with the fundamental architecture of the internet. And then I think we have a real problem. And I think the other related problem, again, not directly about profit margins, but really important, is we've got too few companies controlling too much of our internet access. And right now, Comcast and Time Warner Cable are trying to get hitched and trying to become a company that will dominate, you know, 2/3 of the cable market for the whole country, be the only high-speed option for about 40% of Americans, and that's where we get in real trouble, is these companies get so big that you can't really rein them in. They're so politically powerful that all the people in Washington are afraid to do it, and you end up losing something as amazing as the free and open internet replaced with this new schminternet that they like because they get to pick and choose the channels for you. And that's really why this net neutrality debate is so important, because it's that fundamental protection against that kind of interference. They're going to find and look for all kinds of ways to mess with it that will be profitable and more profitable to them. This is really just the first wave of that fight, but it's so important because once you lose this one, once you lose net neutrality, there's really nothing stopping a big phone or cable company from, you know, messing with that whole experience. And we could look up, you know, a few years from now and realize, you know, just how much we've lost in giving up the amazing internet we have right now.
Okay, thank you. So to everyone watching, Craig is luckily going to also be at the Reddit AMA along with Malkia Cyril, who's the Executive Director of the Center for Media Justice, and Tiffany Chang of Fight for the Future. So if you go over to the Reddit AMA, we'll be able to continue the conversation with them. I want to say thanks to the panelists who are here, in addition to Craig, to Gina, to Kevin, to Nate. I'm sorry that we didn't get Alexis or Larry on the video chat, but they have a lot to say and they have been saying stuff before, and we will hopefully get them next time. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anna.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Gina.
Bye, guys. Thank you all so much. Bye.
Bye.